The Communist Manifesto by Karl. The Communist Manifesto represents an effort to define the aims of communism and the underlying ideology. It makes the case that all historical developments are driven by class conflicts or the exploitation of one class by another. The means of production at a given age determine class connections. However, when the forces of production evolve, these linkages eventually become incompatible. At this time, there is a revolution, and a new class becomes the dominant one. This procedure exemplifies how powerful economic forces are driving the march of history. The class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat is a distinctive feature of modern industrial society. But this exploitative relationship is gradually losing its compatibility with capitalism's productive forces. Therefore, a revolution will be led by the proletariat. This revolution, however, will be distinct from all others because the previous ones merely redistributed property in favor of the new ruling class. The proletariat, however, lacks any means of taking property due to the nature of their class. As a result, once in power, all private property owners will have to be destroyed, and classes themselves would vanish. According to the manifesto, capitalism is fundamentally unstable, making this evolution inevitable. The communists want to support this movement as well as the organizations and groups that are bringing history to a logical conclusion. They contend that governmental reforms or other adjustments cannot eliminate social classes. Instead, there will need to be a revolution. There are 4 sections in the Communist Manifesto. The communists' historical theory and the interaction between the proletariat and bourgeoisie are covered in the first section. The link between the communists and the proletarians is explained in the second section. The weaknesses of earlier socialist writing are discussed in the third section. The relationship between the communists and other parties is covered in the final section. The Communist League, a union of radical workers, met in London in 1847. They hired newly admitted members Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to create a manifesto for them. This document became known as the Communist Manifesto. Marx served as the primary author, with Engels providing editing and support. In 1848, the Communist Manifesto was first printed in London. It is the most widely read and important piece of writing on modern socialism. It is a formal formulation of the ideology that has come to be referred to as Marxism. German philosopher, economist, and sociologist Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883, was also a political revolutionary. After relocating to Paris in 1843, he became friends with Engels, 1820 to 1895, with whom he collaborated on several articles. For their revolutionary writings on communism, Marx and Engels are most remembered. G.W.O.F. Hegel's writings were a major intellectual impact on Marx. According to Hegel's philosophy, history is a process by which the world comes to understand its spiritual nature. Marx expanded on this theory by claiming that as a person's awareness of their spiritual nature grows, the material world makes them feel further and further removed from themselves. A revolution is necessary to overcome this estrangement. However, Marx and Engels did not stop at speculating on the revolution in the abstract. They were not just authors, but also activists who believed that by theorizing, they were actively affecting history. They held that theory was only useful since it promoted social change and clarified the correct means and purposes of revolution. One effort to change history by disseminating knowledge of the communist movement may be seen in the Communist Manifesto. A specter, the phantom of communism, is haunting Europe, the manifesto declares at the outset. The nations of Europe have united in opposition to communism and usually demonize its ideologies. As a result, the communists met in London and wrote this manifesto to express their opinions, goals, and tendencies and to debunk the false information that has been spread. The manifesto starts by discussing the problem of class conflict. The history of every previously existent society is the history of class struggles, claims Marx. The oppressor and the downtrodden have always been at odds with one another throughout history. This conflict is occasionally open and occasionally hidden. But every time, the conflict either results in a radical reconstruction of society or the mutual ruin of the classes. Society used to be organized into complex class structures in former times. For instance, there were feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, and serfs in medieval times. The ruins of feudal society gave rise to modern bourgeois society. Class conflicts still exist in this society, but they have been reduced to a more basic level as the bourgeoisie and proletariat divide society into two opposing camps. The manifesto then demonstrates how numerous revolutions in the method of production and exchange have led to the present bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie started to emerge in the first communities and took off during the age of exploration. Feudal guilds were unable to meet the demands of expanding markets, and the manufacturing middle class subsequently replaced them. However, as markets and demand continued to expand, manufacturing was unable to keep up. The Industrial Revolution resulted from this. The industrial middle class was replaced by industrial millionaires, the modern bourgeois, and manufacturing was supplanted by modern industry. The bourgeoisie has grown in prominence as a result of these advances, pushing the medieval classes into the background. Several political changes coincided with the bourgeoisie's growth as a class. The rise of modern industry and the global marketplace has given the bourgeoisie exclusive political power. The state just looks out for the interests of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie has historically been rather revolutionary. It has abolished all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations wherever it has come into power. All remaining interactions between men are now solely motivated by self-interest because it has destroyed the ties that held people to their superiors. All of the virtues, religious zeal, valor, and sentiment have been given up. The only freedom now is that of free trade, and personal worth is now determined by exchange value. As a result, exploitation that was once hidden by political and religious illusions is now overt, harsh, and obvious. Even once honored professions like those of the doctor have been transformed by the bourgeoisie into wage-laboring ones. Similar to this, family ties have become solely financial and have lost their sentimental cover. The bourgeoisie settles and makes links all over the world because it requires a market that is continually growing. Every nation's production and consumption have a cosmopolitan feel to them. This is true for both material and intellectual output, as national isolationism and sovereignty become more and more untenable. Even the most primitive of societies are drawn into civilization by the bourgeoisie, which also forces all societies to adopt its means of production. It builds a universe in its likeness. Everyone starts to rely on the bourgeois. Additionally, it has boosted governmental centralization. As a result, feudal society gave rise to the means of production and exchange that formed the bourgeoisie's foundation. But eventually, the feudal relationships became incompatible with the emerging productive forces. As a result, the feudal system's fetters had to be burst asunder, which they did. The old system was replaced by one of free competition, and the bourgeoisie gained power. Marx continues by claiming that a current movement of a comparable nature is in progress. The bourgeois society of today is in the process of disintegrating. Modern productive forces are in an uprising against contemporary production conditions. Ironically, commercial crises brought on by overproduction are endangering bourgeois society. These crises are a manifestation of the friction that exists today between bourgeois society and the productive forces. However, the bourgeoisie's attempts to resolve these crises only result in the emergence of new, more severe crises and a reduction in its capacity to avert subsequent ones. As a result, the tools that the bourgeoisie used to defeat feudalism are now being used against them. According to Marx, history should be viewed as the process of classes realigning themselves in response to shifting production methods. However, according to Marx, this kind of history will eventually come to an end. Later on, the manifesto would assert that the current class war is the last of its kind and that when it is resolved, all class differences will be resolved as well. This section makes some claims about the peculiarities of the contemporary age to explain why this would be the case. First, because the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, two opposing classes, have emerged, class conflicts have been simplified. Second, exploitative interactions were once covered up by things like philosophy, but now that the curtain has been pulled back, everything is seen through the lens of self-interest. Thirdly, the bourgeoisie must constantly innovate the means of production if they are to survive. Social interactions are now in an incredibly fragile state, which is unprecedented. How was the video? Did you enjoy it? Post your feedback in our comments section below and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more updates.